Our darshan this morning is Rabbi Yoni Gordis.
Thank you, Master Rabbi. I want to open by saying how deeply grateful I am to be standing here and speaking to you today on the unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. It is just a privilege. Esa enai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains, from the vastness, is where my help is going to come. I'm going to start with the punchline. And the truth of the matter is that we don't coordinate our Divrei Torah here. There's not some secret meeting that happens like over the course of time that we all coordinate. So in deep appreciation to Gloria, to the words that we got from Rabbi Hannah, from Laura, etc., I will continue with their theme. And the punchline that I want to share is not as I often come to you and I say, here's something you need to do for tshuva, here's something you need to bring into your practice, but rather to name the fact that we here as a community are involved in tshuva in a way that no other Jewish community in the world is involved in. And I want to spend a few minutes today talking about the uniqueness of tshuva for us as Cascadian Jews. So Cascadia, you're wondering where is that? You are here. Cascadia is here. It's a term that has been used for about 100 years, but more so for the past 50 years. And it is a bioregional definition of an area that includes much of the state of Washington, much of the state of Oregon, almost all of BC, other than kind of the northeastern part. And this area, a little bit of Idaho too, and this area of the world known as Cascadia has been treated as a region, as a way of thinking about, for me, about regional Judaism. How do we think about this area? This is not the Pacific Northwest, it is not the United States, and it is not Canada. It is actually something unique happening here by the very geography. Cascadia, defined that way because of the waterfalls around our edges that pour water, that create this incredible water basin in which we live. There's actually research that is coming out specifically about the subject that I want to talk about, and recently published a book called Religion at the Edge by several scholars, academic scholars from BC, who are talking about spirituality and the natural world and religion in BC. But I want to talk today about us as Cascadian Jews. There have been regional Jewish cultures around the world since we began. Right? There are Eastern European Jews. I see the descendants of many of them around the room. There are North African Jews. There was North African Jewish culture. There's Caucasus Jews, mountain Jews, regions of the world, not based on a specific country, but based on what the people of that region did and what was unique to their Judaism. So Jews have been here in Cascadia since the first white people came here. We've been here now for several generations. I'm here just over 20 years, and many of us have been here and produced children, grandchildren here, and I think it's time for us to own the fact that there is such a thing as Cascadian Judaism, and there is such a thing as doing tshuva in a Cascadian way. Yeah, many of us do claim or think that we live in the margins of the Jewish world, right? There's not a surprise that they named this book Religion at the Edge. But I actually think I want to invite you to do a reorientation. And I want us to look at what living in this region allows us to do as people doing tshuva. How do we do tshuva in a way that is unique to here? This is not the tshuva that we should be doing, but the tshuva that I am already witnessing this community doing, and I just want to encourage us to go deeper and deeper. So Gloria laid the groundwork. The Talmud tells us in Tractate Yoma, the Babylonian Talmud, that there are 3 levels of tshuva. Really 2 are iterated and a third is added on with time. Tshuva ben Adam lamakom, between a person and the divine. Tshuva ben Adam lechavaro, between a person and their friend, their peer, interhuman, person to person. And then added on over the years is tshuva ben adam la'atzmo, or la'atzma, tshuva between a person and themselves. I would like to take a few minutes to address each of those levels for us here as Cascadian Jews. So the first is tshuva ben adam lamakom, tshuva between adam, a person, and makom. Why makom? Why doesn't it say Elohim? Makom and Elohim, makom literally in Hebrew means place. Space or place, but we'll call it place. And the literature uses that as one of God's names. It is very powerful. It is dealt with very deeply in the mystical world, why it is so. Honestly, I want to tell you that if you want to get into gematria, and if you take the gematria gedola, the exponential gematria of every letter to its square of yud hey vav hey, you end up with makom. Okay? So for those of you who want to geek out on the mystical part, we can later during the break. But I actually want to talk about place and how we experience God in this place. See, the mitzvot, the commandments of ben adam lamakom, and that tshuva is about our relationship to the divine. These are commandments of faith and belief, not so much about the literal practice. We'll get to that with people, but it's about faith and belief. And while, as Rabbi Hannah said, the image of God as father and mother is so strong in the literature, there are also lots of other ways to see God's power. God, makom, place. There are hundreds upon hundreds of references in the Bible and in our liturgy to mountains, to rivers, to the manifestation or presence of God in the world. And throughout much of my life, embedded in different streams of Judaism, those images have been metaphors. Let us think of God's power like a raging river. Let us think of God's greatness like the vastness of the sea. Let us think of God's grandeur like an old tree. But when you live here in Cascadia, these aren't metaphors. These are the powerful day-to-day tools given to us in this unique moment of Jewish time. So, this idea of a natural world, you'll notice I'm not using the term nature here. I'll try to not fall into that. And that is because Judaism doesn't have a natural world. The idea of nature was created in medieval times, and you can say, but what about teva? We all know the sandals, and we all know the term teva in nature. But teva is not a term in the Bible. And teva does not appear in the creation story. Because teva, nature, separates us from everything that is non-human in creation. And Judaism doesn't believe that, as we've heard from our scholars in the past few days. Judaism sees us as part of creation and as wholly responsible in mutuality with it. It is not us and nature. It's not us adoring the natural world. Now, in that we choose to look at it in a different way, we end up in a different relationship with makom than that medieval viewpoint. Several years ago, I was doing some work for the Vancouver Jewish community, and I had to interview most of the rabbis in town. It was about a decade and a half ago. And one of the questions I got to ask them was, so who's your main competition? And every one of them went like that. Every one of them pointed north to the mountains. Every one of them said, come summer, spring, fall, or winter, the people who are members of my shul, they go out there, and that's the competition. And I was puzzled and bothered and wondered, well, A, why don't you move your shul out there? Oh, well, but that's a whole other issue. They weren't going to do that. But the truth of the matter was that if you watched those people who go out to those mountains, to those rivers, to those islands, to those coastlines, and they come back from those weekends away or those weeks away, you see that they have had a deeply spiritual experience. As secular as they might be, we see the power of the divine. We see the glow. We see the high of people's eyes where they are saying, I have experienced the greatness, the vastness of the wonder of this world. I am feeling it in me. God, if shul was only like that, and with all due respect to shul, we want it to be like that way. But see, here's the thing about Cascadian Judaism, and the scholars are writing about it. It is an anti-institutional type of religion here. Many Christians are very Christian and connected to the teachings of Jesus, but not feeling so good about the church for very clear reasons. There are people in every religion who are feeling trouble with institutional teachings or institutions, but feeling very connected to the existence and spirit of the divine in their lives. Even the most secular feel this. So you go out there to those mountains, trees whose lifespans are longer than ours, and how often do you encounter a living thing that has a longer lifespan than you? Rivers that flow virtually endlessly with incredible power. Oceans that, well, you know the oceans, what they do. These are not metaphors. This is the divine, right here, right now, and we live in it. The religious scholars, the academics, are referring to this as reverential naturalism, a really interesting term referring to the finding of spirit in nature, and I want to push back at them and say that actually in the Jewish world, it is not reverential naturalism, it is just reverence. It is just purely the seeing of the divine everywhere as us not separated from it. It is not something outside of us, and it is not something that we need to reach out towards. We're commanded in the Garden of Eden, once we are created, Adam, including the male and the female and all genders. And you should know that Adam is often described as an acronym, Aleph, Daled, Mem, for Adam, David, and Mashiach. When you see a person, when you see an Adam, you are seeing all of humanity built into that person right there. That's the holiness of how we are meant to approach things. And we're told in the Garden of Eden that we are put here li'avda u'lishamra, to work it or serve it. La'avod, that verb means to work, but also to serve. I'll come back to it in a second. And lishamra, to protect it. So that's our job here. See, there are two types of avodah. There's work, and there's the work that we do where we trade our time for money, where we produce products for money, where we work the land, etc. And then there is avodah, that is service. We're about to hear about it in Musaf. The work of the high priest is called avodah. It's service of God. I have a friend who I knew we were going to be friends when I ran into him the second time I met him on the street. And he looked at me in the streets of Jerusalem. He said, "Hey, so how's your avodah?" He didn't mean how's your job. God knows neither one of us had jobs. He meant, how's your relationship with the divine? Like, how's your avodah? How's your service of God? If we could become a community like that, would that not be a powerful model for everyone? But you see, the liturgy is saying that we are involved in this avodah, and therefore our return is part of le'avda u'lishamra. That's part of us, ben adam lamakom. It is about connecting through this world of trees and plants and where we live to that which is not separate from us, to that which has a greater lifespan than us. Because all we are doing in our tshuva is to try to right-size how we are in the world. To right-size ourselves with the divine and say, you're enormous, I'm tiny, and I'm mortal. And I got to bridge between this and that. I've got to return to that. The power of these oceans and these trees that I've spent time with this summer that are 400 and 500 years old and older, and then saying, zoom out a little bit. You're going to live whatever number of years you live. I'm here 500. The divine is here infinite. I am here to help you step into the divine. You want to do tshuva with the divine in your faith? Say, I see God everywhere I look. Makom, and I want to offer kudos to the community Makom here in Vancouver, which really chose to name itself well, and it's a great sister community. Because that Makom has been rooted in our religion for so long that we have often failed to look at it because we're not connected, we're only connected through ideas. Yoni, the circle drawer, lived about 2,000 years ago. He was an actual person, read your Josephus, and Yoni was known as a person who could negotiate with the divine. Draw a circle, step in, it's a drought. Yoni would say, I'm not stepping out of this circle until you make it rain. And they would haggle, Yoni and the divine. One day when he was old, in the middle of his life, Yoni walked down the road and he found an old man, planting a carob tree. And he looked a little puzzled at that older man and he said, what are you doing? He said, I'm planting a carob tree. He said, but it takes 70 years for a carob tree to bear fruit. Well, favos, what are you doing this for? And he said, I'm doing this for my children and my grandchildren. Just as my ancestors planted for me, so I will plant for them. Now, not only have many Jewish organizations and foundations adopted that phrase as their logo, but the truth of the matter is that that has been embedded in Judaism forever. That we have a responsibility backwards and forwards. And to be connecting to the divine, to Makom, is to take that responsibility upon ourselves. It is to use our relationship with this world to connect to the vastness. So, Cascadian tshuva vis-a-vis the divine. Can I return to place and feel that I have returned to the divine and actually feel embraced by it? Can I walk out of here today, look at those mountains, that shore, whatever you might see, and realizing, I am home. I need to feel home. That is my tshuva. The Talking Heads said it beautifully in their tune, Naive Melody. They said, home, it's where I want to be, but I guess I'm already there. And the truth of the matter is that this yearning is the yearning for tshuva, the yearning for return. We can hear the invitation of Makom here, like we can hear it nowhere else that I've ever been in the world. It is a unique opportunity that we have and a unique responsibility to actually make it real. That's one part of tshuva. Ben Adam l'chavero, between people. So let me say a few truths that I know about Cascadians, not just Cascadian Jews. They're really nice people. They're really polite. They're really friendly. They, in that almost too British way, give you a lot of space. But they are warm and they are considerate. But it's not just our buses, that say sorry as they drive down the road. There is a deeply rooted faith in humanity that resides in this. And the Midrash picked up on it when it said, long ago, about 2,000 years ago, in Vayikra Rabbah, Derech Eretz Kadma Torah. Derech Eretz, Menschlichkeit, to be a good human being, preceded the creation of the Torah. Somehow the people of this region need to know that before you have a philosophy and before you have any kind of wisdom, be a mensch. Treat people well. So let's just be honest here and say that we, and I'm referring to anyone who is non-indigenous here, we are newcomers here. We arrived in colonial waves over several hundred years. We inflicted incredible horrors on the First Nations who were here. They have been here much longer than our people even claim to have existed. Welcome to 5,783 in our calendar, and think about the Haida Nation who can clearly document that they've been here 14,000, 15,000 years. So our span of measuring time is changed by being here. And on Friday, when we noted Truth and Reconciliation Day, it struck me, A, how wonderful it was to see people wearing orange shirts, and it struck me how wonderful it is to live in a place where tshuva is mandated, where you're actually told to take a day off of work to do tshuva. Because here's how tshuva works, okay? You say, I know that ben adam l'chavero, between a person and their friend, right? I know I have wronged you. I see and declare the damage I have inflicted on you. And I will work to do better, and I will bring healing into this world and this relationship. You can find 1,000 books about tshuva in Judaism, but truth and reconciliation is the two-line definition of what tshuva is, regardless of whether it's between you and First Nations, or you and your partner, and you or a person you don't know on the street who you may have wronged. It's about stating what you know that you've done. It's about stating it out loud, explaining that you know the pain, and saying, I will do my best to change my behavior. Yes, we heard that aliyah about changing behavior. So what's the utility of this tshuva? The scholars in this book about religion on the edge note that reconciliation has made it into most spiritual traditions, even the mainstream ones in British Columbia, but in Washington and Oregon it has not. That when asked about bringing in land acknowledgements, the priests and ministers in Washington state said, I I don't exactly know whose it was. I have it written down. And here, through repetition of it, whenever we gather, we have begun to change the consciousness of how we are here and how we relate to First Nations and how we relate to ourselves as colonial people who arrived here uninvited. For Jews, it's tricky. We arrive a lot of places uninvited. We have to learn a lot about how to do this. We get thrown out of places, we arrive places, and we find how to be there and be good and how to have relationships. Part of this is about knowing how to be in relationship. So this kind of tshuva ben adam l'chavero, calls for real humility. It calls for us to stand back, to stand a little smaller. And for me, that is what it feels like to be Cascadian, to have some kind of view of the proportionality of the world that we need to take. We are not loud or bombastic. I once had a chorus teacher in grade 7. He called me Peanut, just so you know. I sang in a very high voice, and he explained how loud you should sing. And he said, sing loud enough in a choir that you can hear your own voice, but don't sing so loud that you can't hear the voices of those next to you. It's the perfect way to modulate your voice when you're singing. And there is something very cascading about that and about our tshuva. A last story about tshuva ben adam l'chavero and how we can learn here. A number of years ago, I had the privilege to visit Haida Gwaii, the islands to the north and west of us, and spent an afternoon with a watchman, a guy about my age, First Nations guy, who was guarding the totem poles. He was doing his miluim, his reserve duty of spending a month there. And we were just sitting there, slowly watching the tide come in and come out. And Donald Trump had just been elected President of the United States. And we began to talk about that, and he began to chuckle. And he said, you know, people down there are really freaking out. I said, yeah, it's scary. He said, yeah, it's true. He's a real goofball. He said, but you know, when you've been around 14,000 years, you learn how to not sweat certain things. You realize that certain things pass. The really bad things happen, and you survive them, and they pass. The gift that he gave me that day was that he taught me how to zoom out, to say you are so focused on the here and now. And tshuva is a return to something vaster. And we, as friends and as people, have the ability to do that for each other. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes we need to say to a friend who is grieving and really in pain, I'm not going to zoom you out, I'm going to let you be in here. I'm going to know that you need to be in that. But we also know that we have the power to look vaster. That's the fact that we've been around for so long, that we've understood context and our ability to change and to grow. And the invitation to zoom out that my fellow Cascadian gave me on Haida Gwaii has sat with me forever. Are we as people listening more than we are speaking? Are we helping each other? So tshuva ben adam l'chavero is reconciliation on every level. And I'm thankful to the First Nations for having brought that into my life like it was never brought in before. And I've needed it everywhere I've ever lived. Tshuva is measured according to the rabbis with the expression, oto adam, oto makom. The same person, same place. If a person is in the same place and they screw up in the same way, then it wasn't tshuva. If you as a person are back in makom, in a new way, in a changed way, then that is your tshuva. That's your litmus test for your tshuva. Can we do it differently? Can we change? Can we know that our shared survival is dependent on this tshuva? Our shared survival is dependent on our tshuva. And finally, third level, ben adam la'atzmo, between me and me. So what does it mean? Can I humble myself? And I'm not saying in a self-deprecating way. I am not of that school of Judaism, that says, look, I'm more nothing than you are. I'm not saying to self-deprecate when you do tshuva. I'm saying stand next to an old cedar and reflect on my duration. And as my friend Georgia taught me from an elder who she works with, He said to her, Georgia, you're trying to save forests, but you're looking at it through human eyes. Please try to look at it through the eyes of a cedar. My friends, I am trying to look at myself through the eyes of a cedar. I don't want to see my life as a process of loss or gain, but of something that is much vaster. And these trees and these people and this place have the ability to right-size me, to make me not too large, not too small. Not small at all, actually, but part of something enormous. Da lifnei mi ata omed. Know before whom you stand. You stand before all of creation. You stand before it that sees the part of it of you that sees God as separate, or that sees you as part. The part of you that sees you as connection to trees and those things in nature, and the part of you that doesn't. You stand before all of it. So, to wrap up, I want to invite you, if you feel comfortable, to close your eyes for just a minute. That's already a relief, huh? Take a breath. And feel how lucky you are to be in this world. Feel how lucky you are to be in this part of the world. And yes, closing the eyes is an act of power. May you know that the breath you are taking right now is part of a symphony that has been co-written with all that was created during that week, and you live with it. You are co-creating that symphony with every living thing. May you know that what you are doing today, even as your thoughts wander, as you get distracted by your hunger, by your desires, by your body, may you know that everything you're doing today is tshuva. Everything you're doing today is return. I bless you and I bless me that we may all return to be all that we can. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Ashikala Yoni.